Good afternoon, everyone. Don't let the background fool you, because I actually would rather be where Blaine Bartlett is right now than where I am. And I'm in unbelievable. I went to the ribbon cutting of the Waldorf Astoria here in Cancun, Mexico. It was quite an event and quite a trip right off the back of Saudi Arabia. My wife and I are down here enjoying ourselves, but Blaine is in Madison, Wisconsin, where my youngest daughter is taking her first finals, and I am a little bit jealous, I have to admit, Blaine, and I'm very grateful that you're here. You can see that learnBlaineBartlett.com/LMM. Blaine is my mentor, but he's also the mentor now to those that I mentor. So we're getting our whole company integrated, the leadership in next year's mastermind. Before we bring Dave Goldman on, Blaine, just give me a little bit of background on the mastermind for 2023, because I know my team's super excited about it, and I want to get more people in our community involved.
Oh, hey, first of all, I want to just acknowledge you for making it possible for your folks to participate in this. It's transformative, humbly speaking. But the idea of the program, in this is the third year I've run this mastermind. It's a year-long program. And we've got some amazing folks. I capped it so everybody's getting personal attention. I've capped the membership in it. I teach every week. For 52 weeks, you've got access to me once a week. We've got lessons that we work with, all organized around my leadership ACT model: awareness, context, communication, commitment, and trust. These are the 5 domains that we explore. And all of it's organized literally in service of causing the kind of movement that produces elegantly the results that you want to have in your organization. And I use the word elegant: minimal unintended consequences. I mean, I can lead anybody if I got a big enough stick or big enough pot of money, but I got to clean up after myself big time after that. I want to do it elegantly. And that's what this whole program's about. How do you do this elegantly?
Well, speaking of elegance, we have the gold standard here, Dave Goldman, and he's the CEO and co-founder of barrelDAO. And ELIQS has recently expanded under this new parent company, barrelDAO, to support the efforts in expansion, especially with the advent of Web3. Dave, just to start off, welcome to Office Hours. We had to have a little family reunion before we welcomed you.
Yeah, really appreciate you guys having me on. Thanks so much.
And we won't let your background fool us as well. I'm sure you're not in a prison, you're somewhere else. But more importantly, let's talk about the new form relationship and how this helps, especially with the advent of Web3 and understanding, what ELIQS was capable of, and now with the expansion is capable of in the alcoholic and non-alcoholic products space.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's probably helpful to talk a little bit about why we formed barrelDAO, kind of how we even got to where we are today, and then I can dive into the Web3 aspect. So my 2 co-founders, Joe, Max, and I, we met at UCLA Anderson. We were at business school together getting our MBAs. It was 2018. It was pre-COVID, a very different time in our lives. But we all took an entrepreneurship class together. And that was where we first started working on the concept that would later become barrelDAO. One of the first assignments of that class was to come up with some concept for a business and do some research that you thought could be interesting and that you could bring to market. And so, like any good MBAs, the 3 of us went into a bar that was on campus. We were sharing a beer and we're sitting around, and someone asked the question, has anyone ever homebrewed before? And it eventually evolved into this larger question that became the basis for our master's thesis at UCLA, which was, why can't I put my face on a beer? And it turns out that the answer to that is incredibly complicated and harkens all the way back to the end of Prohibition, which we actually celebrated the 89th anniversary of this week. And it was the establishment of the 3-tier distribution system and how manufacturing processes within the beverage industry were created. And long story short, we went through the process of evaluating the beverage industry and seeing what changes needed to be made and what inventions did we need to come up with to solve that question of how do you put your face onto a beer. And so that was what we spent the past 3 years building out, is this core infrastructure that spanned everything from new models for direct-to-consumer, for compliant direct-to-consumer distribution of every type of alcohol, all the way down to novel production processes, which we filed patents on, for inverting the supply chain and adding design after a beverage has been produced. All told, what that created was, we call it our core infrastructure, and that's what we put into barrelDAO. But that core infrastructure that allows for composable manufacturing, being able to put any IP, whether it's your face, whether it's a celebrity or an existing brand, or whether it's the explosion of IP that's happening in Web3 with NFTs, take that IP and compose with manufacturing and beverage to create small batch products that you can, do the long tail of beverage production for.
Before I let Blaine interject real quickly, I want to make a distinction, because you can put your face on the foam of a beer. If you've been to the Guinness factory in Dublin, one of my favorite things in that tour is it's one of my favorite pictures of my wife and I being able to laser your face onto the foam of your brew. But more importantly, this solves even a bigger question of putting your face on a beer. Anyway, so to that end, Blaine, do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued. When I first saw the profile on this, I was going, "This is fascinating." Yeah, and in hearing you talk, Dave, sitting down with a napkin, with your buddies, having a beer here, deliberately and intentionally, how do we disrupt this, and what do we need to invent to make this next iteration of this space possible? The entrepreneurial mindset that even brings to the table the ability to think in those ways, I think, is profound. It's not so much what do I do, but what do we need to invent? What did you find yourself actually inventing?
It's a great question, and I appreciate the comment. When we evaluated even the supply chain for the beverage industry, what we saw was an incredibly horizontal supply chain. So the people who are creating the cans are different than the people putting the design on the cans, or different than the people filling it up, different from the people putting the top on the filled beer, oftentimes in craft breweries, and then different from the people who are distributing it to retailers, different from the retailers who are selling it to the consumer. It was an impossible model in order to do customization. I mean, can you imagine getting a custom order and trying to track that order, or let alone thousands of those orders across the supply chain? So we looked at what are models for customization in other industries, and the big insight was that you need to push customization as far down the supply chain as possible. So the piece that we were doing in what you just heard, what I said, was putting design onto the can. That happened at the very beginning of the supply chain for the existing beverage industry. So we needed to invent a new manufacturing process that allowed us to get filled cans that we could then put design on at the very, very end of that supply chain process, prior to shipping it out to the customer, just in order to make the model possible.
And UCLA's MBA program is one of the top in the country, and I've spoken there as well as at the entrepreneurship program at UCLA. But I'm always intrigued, because there's a conflictual right now philosophy about secular education and entrepreneurship itself. YouTube, the Dave Meltzers, Gary V's, Tom Bilyeu's, Ed Milet's of the world teaching entrepreneurship online for free, instead of what was probably, UCLA is not quite as expensive as, let's say, a private institution, but still quite expensive to get your MBA. What was it about the program at UCLA that inspired you three, when sitting there having a beer, when everybody else may be watching the LA Chargers or the playoff games or whatever else at the beer? Your mind was programmed from, most likely, that program to start looking at things differently, to be co-creative. And I would love for you to share, because I'm still under the auspice that education is the most powerful thing in the world, and there's multiple ways to educate. But sometimes some entrepreneurs miss out on this co-creation and collaboration that Blaine teaches by being in that program that's invaluable beyond the investment of education.
Yeah. So the question just being, what did we find to be
Yeah,
unique
what
within
inspired
the-
you from that program? You know, I wouldn't think it's something that was in a book, but there's something about these programs that create this new mindset that allows you to, you know, change the world with something that everybody wants is their face on a beer.
Yeah, I think that there were three factors that collided together to create this environment that allowed us to start the venture. The first was that being at an MBA program, this is something that I think is probably taken for granted oftentimes, but we had a very big safety net. And so we had this ability to experiment and iterate and test out product ideas while also doing an internship over the summer for me at Goldman Sachs and for my two co-founders at leading, at Salesforce and one of the leading med device companies. And so we had this ability to be in a structured program, get to talk to some of the best minds in business because UCLA has such a great group of people. And that being kind of the second factor is that we had access to incredible people to talk to, as well as initial investors to invest capital to get this thing off the ground. And then kind of that final piece just being that we were forced to do it, right? We had this, we were sitting in a room, we were told you have to build a business, and we got to experiment with these different things to come up with that model.
Excellent.
Now, under the
ELIQS.
ELIQS. Yeah. You've got an incubator arm that's in place here. So, you've basically got a three-legged stool that, kind of sets a foundation for everything that you're doing. I'd be interested in, you talking about how does this brand incubation part of the house actually work for what you're doing, because you've got a direct-to-consumer product. And then you've got this Web3 piece that you're developing. How does this incubator structure actually inform these other two, or does it?
It definitely does. When we looked at, we call what we built identity products within the beverage industry. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to what I said earlier around it's taking IP and it's applying it to different beverages. Mm-hmm. That concept of identity products within a category already exists in apparel, where you can go to Custom Ink, and it already exists in books with Vista, business cards and all those. And so we modeled a lot of how we thought about the beverage category off of those existing places where identity products already existed. When we looked at those, we saw that the three things, really the two things that we started going after first, brand incubation, which in apparel kind of looks a lot like fast fashion, and personalization or customization, which looks a lot like Custom Ink. Those were the two by far biggest segments of identity products. And then Web3 turned into kind of that third leg of the stool, which we got really excited about because of the application of IP and the explosion of IP. The way that we see brand incubation right now is that it's a place for us to continue pushing deeper in innovation within the supply chain of the beverage industry. So I think you can hear when I talk about ELIQS, I'm talking about what is very good looking, but still white labeling of an existing product. Mm-hmm. When we do things within the brand incubation segment of the business, and also when we do things in the Web3 side of the business, we're taking some of the innovations that we've built from ELIQS, like direct-to-consumer distribution, like one-on-one customer relationships, kind of a lot of the tech stack that we've built out still applies. And then we can apply that to partnering with co-packers across the country, partnering with, right now we're working with a tequila liquid sourcer in Mexico, coming up with novel, not just design and packaging, but novel liquids that are going inside of this thing. What's cool too, when we started the business and we were at business school at the time, one of the big aha moments for us was we were evaluating the craft brewing industry. And there's been an explosion of craft brewing over the past 10, 15 years. 10, 15 years ago, there were under 2,000 craft breweries. Today, there are 19,000 in the US. And with that, what we saw, and this was even back in 2017, 2018, the average craft brewer was operating at a 60% utilization capacity of what they had. And and that didn't even tell the truth because it's the average. Some great craft brewers were operating at 20, 25% utilization capacity. It turned out that's true across the entire beverage industry, that there's that distribution of underutilized capacity. And so what we saw as an opening for someone to be CapEx light, to kind of sit in the middle and to piece together all these things where at first it was take pre-made products and put design on them. But with brand incubation, it turned into, let's also work with these suppliers, these co-packers, breweries, et cetera, that have that excess capacity. And for our biggest clients who we know are going to be successful, let's develop out products. Let's learn about what the supply chain looks like outside of craft beer, because we want it to be all beverages everywhere for the ELIQS side of things. And let's take those lessons that we learn. Let's make it cash flow positive because we're doing it under something that we can sell. And then over time, we can start to spin it into ELIQS products, which really are the biggest part of our business.
Fascinating.
UCLA would be proud of you, Dave Goldman. And I assume that's a Padres hoodie you have on.
It is. I actually got it for free, so I'm not a Padres fan.
That's the only way people get Padres stuff. It's either on sale or for free. And now Dodger stuff is on sale as well, which Matt's laughing in the background as our producer is a huge Dodger fan. One quick, Joe's waiting in the green room, but we got time. Just did it help you get a internship at Goldman because of your last name?
You know, the first day, so they fly you out to New York for the first 3 weeks of the internship. And the first day that I walked into the building, I scanned my badge and the security guard stops me and he goes, "Oh, Mr. Goldman." And he opens the door specific for me. So I don't know if it helped, but I definitely got some special treatment on the way in.
I'd be afraid not to treat you well if I worked for Goldman and saw that last name. Anyway, the CEO and co-founder of barrelDAO, ELIQS.com, just an incredible young entrepreneur and giving back to our community with great co-creative collaborative ideas with his friends from his program. More people should look into how education provides that safety net, as you suggest. And as we bring on our next guest, we'll talk about the support that we should be giving everyone in an equitable way, because the only color of education that I have found to be a constant dependent variable is the color green. And the people that are educated, whether it's in secular schools or other places today on YouTube or from the Ed Milet's and Dave Meltzer's, Tom Bilyeu's and Gary V's, you got to be educated to make the green. And if you make the green, you can buy the gold. Dave Goldman, thanks so much. We'll have you back on. Keep up the great work.
Good stuff, Dave. Absolutely. Love it. Got to get space on a beer.
I love that. I got this hoodie for free. I can't wait to have our next guest come on. As you know, both of our lives have been incongruency with what Joe Scantlebury is working on, livingcities.org, president and CEO of Living Cities. Welcome to Office Hours, Joe.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, good evening, really.
Yeah, good evening. And I would say I was talking about the color green, and green is such an important color in equity and inclusion in creating more opportunities. And I mean it on both sides of the fence, is that, you know, we have been doing this long enough. I've been blessed in the world of sports to, you know, represent with Jackie Robinson and Warren Moon being my business partner and the Clemente family, working really hard so that we just say, hey, Warren Moon was a great quarterback, not the first black quarterback in the Hall of Fame or whatever people talk about in the past, but I'm now on a new journey. I've left the sports world to itself. I think we've, you know, started with equity there in the sports world. It's time to get it into the financial realm. And I just want to talk rich. I want people to be empowered. And if you put more green in and you put more green in with the right people, you get more green out. And this is proven data-wise over the last 30 years that we've been collecting data to do so. What are some of the things that have led you into your field with Living Cities to provide the green to the right communities so that we can get more green out?
Sure. Well, first, after you were talking about the Padres, I felt like I should go grab my Yankee jacket and throw it on just to represent, you know, just to get fair air.
Just so everyone here is disappointed. The Dodger fans, the Yankee fans, the Padre fans, they're all disappointed this year.
Well, let me just share with you a little bit about Living Cities, and I'll tell you how I got here. Living Cities is a collaboration of financial institutions and philanthropies, and we partner with cities to actually, frankly, close racial income and wealth gaps. That's what we do. And we've been doing that in various forms for 31 years. And while our attention and our focus is really beginning to think about barriers to wealth building, we have a vision. And the vision is simply put that all people in U.S. cities are economically secure, are able to build wealth, live abundant, dignified, and connected lives. That's it. Basic thing, right? And how I got here, frankly, this is, how I got here, just speaking personally, is that, I'm the first generation son of two immigrants who came from Panama, eloped, right? Very romantic, going to come to the U.S., going to build a life. It didn't quite work out as they envisioned. The marriage broke up pretty early. My mother, single parent, raising two kids. And she was very insistent about education, very insistent about opportunity. And so I appreciate what you were sharing with the last caller. But more importantly, she kept imbuing in us a spirit that at the end of the day, no one's going to give you anything. You're going to have to make it. Yeah. And you're going to have to make it because at the end of the day, you got to invest in yourself. And at Living Cities, what we've been able to do is we've been able to really think through how we can invest in communities that frankly are sometimes invisible. So recently, with the help of the Kauffman Foundation, we were able to announce the launch of our third Catalyst Fund. This is a fund that we intend to actually support fund managers of color and fund managers who are investing in both private equity and venture capital who may not be of color, but who see the value in enterprise and founders of color. Because we know that the best way to grow wealth is to invest in people. There's no return if you don't invest.
Exactly.
But we have a system, unfortunately, and this is not even by law, this is by taste, preference, practice, habit of going where we always go. And so we missed opportunities to invest in people we've never heard of. Just to stay with the sports metaphor, way back when, I remember when folks discovered Dominican players and the Dominican baseball players. And all of a sudden, the Dodgers and everybody could invest in the DR to find just that one guy who could pitch the lights out. Yeah. One guy who could knock it out of the park every time. Can I find the next David Ortiz? I love David Ortiz, even though he's on the other side, right?
Yeah.
We found a way to see value where before we saw none. Our aspiration is that, frankly, in a country that is eventually going to be a non-white country, but a multi-ethnic plurality where there's no majority, the economic rules that have privileged some over others, whether in home ownership, we're all learning now about the way that home ownership in Black communities and Black owners is devalued systematically. Those are individual choices and as well as systematic choices. Some we can undo. In this investment capital space, this is really all about taking a risk on people who have shown tenacity, like my mother did. My mother, just to wax on her for half a minute, never learned to drive. She had no driver's license. She worked for the city of New York as a clerk in child services. But somehow she had a boyfriend who owned trucks and had a trucking business. She became the president of the trucking business, ran it more efficiently. It was thriving, but they could never get venture capital or support capital to fix the truck. So, of course, they borrowed from people who were of less repute. When she left the business collapsed. But she was the one who made it thrive, made it grow. I asked myself, now first, what would it have been like if my mother, first of all, could drive? Okay. Second of all, what if she had gone to business school to think about transportation, to think about trucking? What if she could have gotten fair interest capital to actually grow their business? What would have happened? What would it have looked like? So many families and so many histories we can go into, and we can hear story after story after story where folks who have the ability, the tenacity, the drive, the will can't get the capital necessary to move their ideas forward. And as a result, our GDP doesn't grow.
Yep. You know, Joe, I mean, your Catalyst Fund, it's $100 million Catalyst Fund, right?
Yes.
100 million. I mean, that you got some shekels to work with here. The idea, I love where you're, what you're talking about, particularly with your mom. The purpose of any business, and David has heard me say this, purpose of any business has to be positioning themselves so that anybody that comes in contact with them has the opportunity to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're doing that well, if their purpose is to enhance thriving, whatever their product or service mix is, they're going to have people coming, beating down the doors to work with them because I want to thrive.
Sure.
That's what I want to do in my life. So with your Catalyst Fund, I'd be interested here. You're working with a lot of I mean, like David said, I mean, you got 19 of the world's leading foundations and financial institutions working with you here. How are you positioning this notion objectively and visibly that you have the opportunity to thrive? As part of the ethos of what you're doing, to close the gaps, in those three different domains that you talk about.
Sure. So first, let me be clear. We're actually raising the money for that fund. So I just want to be very transparent about that. Secondly, our members, and these are both the donors as well as the participants in this collaboration, we're all thinking together. What are the ways that those institutions can leverage each other, leverage what we learn from communities? How do we actually do this in a way that can be scaled over time? It's not enough to have a project. So let's assume 100% funding in a month or two of the Catalyst Fund. We already have a pipeline of funds that have a great track record, that are doing great work. And unfortunately, for many of those funds and fund managers, their track record doesn't seem to garner additional support. Mm-hmm. Right? Their track records and their being at the table I was at a meeting this past weekend in Baltimore at the Mission Investors Exchange. These are all impact investors. And a gentleman stood up, he's been 45 years in this business, and he had the seniority of 75, statuesque, and he spoke very, very clearly about feeling like he's hearing the same conversation he heard when he began. And always feeling like you are, yes, even if you're excellent, even if you're skilled, even if you have the reputation of a Melissa Bradley, a pivot of 1863 Ventures, or Jim Castlebury of Known Holdings, even if you have that stature and experience, you're still in this supplicant mode, asking for support, asking for investment, when, I frankly have a very good friend who I won't say his name because he'll be embarrassed if he sees this, who he's brilliant. He's a beautiful guy. We have a great time. I know he knows very little about this field. But nonetheless, in a gathering that came together, he said, Joe, I need some advice. I've got $20 million of impact funds that have been put in my hands, and I need your advice on what I can do with it. And of course, I'm saying, like, I love you, but I want to strangle you, right? Yeah. Now, I don't have to tell you what he looks like and what I look like. I mean, his access and privilege is very much tied to race. Mm-hmm. And we understand that. But we also understand that value and economic value comes in all forms, and in all people, and in all talent. And somehow at Living Cities, one of the things that we hope to do is to help change the lens and the perspective of potential investors, so they can begin to see the market value and the growth potential and possibility of everyone around us.
Right. I love that.
And there's no better cause and way to create abundance. And I love the fact that that's part of the mission, is the idea of this infinite amount of everything for everyone, if we just would open our minds, our hearts, and our hands to it. And one of the most impactful statistics that I always love to share with people to give credibility to what we're talking about is with all the money that was raised in 2022 this year, and it was an extraordinary amount of money, less than 3% of that money went to women and people of color.
That's right.
over 73% of our country is women and people of color, and less than 3. You got a better chance of getting funded just by going to Stanford than you do compared to the other 73%, just by putting that name next to your name. If you are a white middle-aged man like Blaine and I, what's the best thing that we can do to help close this gap? What's the best thing we can do to help create the equity with equity in all classes and all races?
I'll tell you what our members have done. And they are, the people who sit at our board are very diverse. But when Living Cities began, it was very much a white male table. And what they discovered was the power of convening, the power of coming together, the power of pushing one another, because there's some things that a financial institution can do that a private foundation cannot do. There's some things that a private foundation can do that a financial institution doesn't have the freedom to do. On the other side, you open the room, you open the door to bring in people who you frankly would never have met. I think the power of convening, the power of coming together is key. Taking the chance to think about metrics beyond those metrics that are so easy and comfortable to go after. And I liken it to this. My grandfather, it's funny that we started with baseball. My grandfather, on my father's side, was a Negro League pitcher. He played for the New York Cubans, was an all-star. Satchel Paige was a peer, Josh Gibson, etc. So he played. And then ultimately, at the end of his career, he joined the Cincinnati Reds as a left-handed specialist, right? So it was the end of his career. He didn't get a chance. But what would have happened had, as you mentioned, Jackie Robinson, had that barrier been removed and the value been seen? I think part of seeing value is about using social capital. You, as middle-aged white men, say, hey, who don't I know? And how do I get to know them?
Yep.
What else is happening out here? And I'll use a very simple thing. So I grew up in the era of hip-hop. Okay, it just began. We didn't even call it hip hop then. And I remember how it was not played on radios at all. And it was almost like a band thing. You had to listen to Mr. Magic late at night coming from, Connecticut somewhere. I don't even know where he was. But anyway, it was interesting because I was in an elevator and I'm listening to a Wu-Tang Clan song as Muzak. And I'm like, talk about crossover. Yeah. I'm in a huge building, business attire, the whole bit. Saying, that is a Wu-Tang Clan song playing in the elevator. So my point is, we can see value, but somehow you have to be introduced to it. And a lot of it is personal. Right? A lot of it is personal. The gentleman you had on before, his last name being Goldman, that was a cute story, right? Walking into Goldman Sachs and people wondering if he's Mr. Goldman's relation of some sort. Entry. I walk in, even if my name was Goldman, I don't think they would make that mistake. Okay? But at some point they might say, Scantlebury, we've heard of you. And those 15 people that you're bringing along with you, we've heard of them too. Come on through.
Come on in.
Let us all convene and let's raise the bar of awareness. We're going to have you back on to continue the conversation. We have many other shows as well. This is, for me, a critical business and life issue and a pursuit of ours inside the United States and out, Blaine and I. So we appreciate you taking the time to join us, and you help so many people. Let us help you as well. livingcities.org, President and CEO of Living Cities, Joe Scantlebury. You are an all-star in our book. We appreciate you. Come back and visit us.
Thank you very much.
Loved having you on, Joe.
Well done.
Well done. Yeah.
You could tell Matt's a Dodger fan. He quick cut Joe right out of there. He heard Yankees and he's like, oh, F this guy. He's like, he wasn't scared of the Padres. But anyway, takeaways of the day, Blaine. We are coming into the finals here. What do you got for me?
The landing here. Both of our guests were absolutely intriguing to me in different ways. And it has to do with, and I'm going to use this word, the entrepreneurial focus. Joe in his way, comes at, the idea of there's a need, there's gaps here. What, and I'll use this word, what can we invent to fill that gap? How do we actually go about doing this? And convening, getting curious. And I think it's the curiosity that is kind of rising to the point of that's my takeaway. The more curious I am, the more effective I ultimately end up being, both personally, but also organizationally. I start, opening up cupboards. What's behind that door? What's under that cover? I mean, I could listen to Joe talk all day long. I absolutely, I love what he's doing, where he's coming from. With Dave, I would never have thought about print on demand beverages. I mean, you talk about out of the box thinking, and that's born out of curiosity. What do we need to invent here to make this whole thing different? So where I would go to with this is, as we close out the year and begin to come into the new year, my invitation to folks is, what can you do to start, exercising your curiosity muscle? Because, when you start getting curious, you start uncovering things that you've never even thought about. And that is where opportunity sits. And that's where I think we can go to the bank in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no doubt. And we both are forming communities here in 2023. You with learn.blainebartlett.com/LMM, which we're putting our team into. And then I have my new office hours group where people can have Q&A with me every Monday and build a community of people that want to help each other and know people that can help each other. As Joe was saying, my takeaway is education still the best investment.
Yep.
We're blessed that education has many different faces today, and through technology, whether it's a mastermind with Blaine Bartlett or office hours with David Meltzer or UCLA's MBA program, they all have great value of investment. And from the beginning, our moms, your mom, Joe's mom, and my mom, they made it quite clear that the best investment is in yourself, and the best investment in yourself is, of course, education. And I want to let everyone know that, to me, these people that have been on here today are inspired by improving themselves, by being more interested and interesting. And there's so many best ways to be more interested. Join Blaine, join me. Blaine, I always learn when I'm around you. That's why I love being around you. Definitely, I want to thank Joe and Dave Goldman as well for joining us and teaching us so much. Hopefully, we're making a difference. We've done hundreds of these episodes, believe it or not, Blaine, and we'll continue to do more. Yep. Enjoy Madison. I'm sorry you're not going to be able to get together with Marlena there in Madison, but they're blessed to have your wisdom at the University of Wisconsin today. And we will see you soon, my friend. Thank you so much for joining.
We will. You guys enjoy Mexico.
One more day. We've been around the world, Julie and I, so we're almost home.
It's time to get home. Time to get home.
Exactly. Thank goodness for technology. Thank you, Blaine Bartlett. Remember, everybody, be more interested than interesting. Be kind to your future self. Do good deeds, and I promise your life will be better. Thanks so much.